Hey painters, welcome back. Today's video is inspired by one of my Patreon supporters who said, I would like some advice on how to break down digital painting in the style of the traditional illustrator Bernie Fuchs. If you're familiar with his work before you even, if you don't know the name, that's okay, but you definitely know the images. Take a look at some of these paintings. Beautiful stuff. I love the, paintings of presidents and of famous athletes and celebrities, paintings of children's books. He kind of had that career where he did everything and did it great. Very famous artist and someone that comes from that era that was before I was born, but that era of artwork that influenced everyone who influenced me, right? Like from the artistic influences of my mentor to the family influences of all those people that just, were just sponges to that Americana from that era, right? So that's what led me to do this drawing here of Walter Payton. Walter Payton was almost like a mythical creature in my childhood. My uncle was always talking about toughness and the gridiron and all of these terms that had to do with the NFL and being a man and being strong. And I remember being like 6, 7, 8-year-old little boy just wondering about all that stuff and learning about all that stuff and wondering if I was tough and wondering what toughness really meant and just kind of thinking through all that stuff and being definitely influenced by my uncle and the other people in my family who were mentoring me through that stage of life. And I started painting this painting because I just thought, thinking about that nostalgic period of like what resonates as nostalgia for me. Well, I think about these certain like color palettes, and I think about these certain figures and their battle armor, right? The jerseys or whatever. I loved the Bears jerseys from this time period. I don't know if they're the same now or not. I don't watch much football, but back then I did, and I loved their jerseys. I loved Walter Payton's like white mouthpiece and chin strap with like that particular breakdown of bars on his helmet, and just the way everything fit together. It was like there was an aesthetic about it that was appealing to even my little kid art brain, and I remember just loving the way he played, right? So when I think about like Bernie Fuchs and like doing some nostalgic inspired artwork, I knew I had to pick something from my own familial nostalgia. So there's a lot going on here. Just something a little bit technical, if we could take a step toward that for a minute. The technical side of this is that if you remember the images that I showed in the beginning, you've got basically 3 layers. You have pencil sketching, where you can even have hatching, which is like, just linear amassing of value through just pencil line, right? So you have mark making that stays present into the final piece. You can get some of the background imagery laid in just as hatching or mark making there. And then you get on top of that, you get these real wet washes. And in this case, I have a linen canvas, oil painting kind of canvas texture that I'm painting on. And I'm painting with the wet media pretty wet initially, effectively like having at least like 40, 50, 60% water. And that lets there be more bleed and more transparency in the paint. And then you get to see more of the paint into the body of the surface texture. And so then you have these 2 pieces already, right? These 2 components of the Bernie Fuchs style, which is that you have you leave that pencil work evident into the final piece, number 1. Number 2, you have wet washes on a textured surface. And then 3 is you use flat masks of like a more opaque paint that sits on top of that. And it's those 3 things sitting together in different ways across the whole body of his work that create that unique look. And if you combine that with maybe like if you have a copy of Lightroom and you can go get some Visco presets or something. I don't know if people still use those, but I have some from back in the day. And I have them all loaded up into Lightroom, and I'll just expose, some image I want to work on in this film style exposure. So like, it'll alter the colors and the values and the warms and the cools, the tints and all that stuff to sort of replicate like, oh, this is like old Kodak gold print film from the 70s or whatever, and it kind of has that like vintage look. So you can take a modern photograph, process it to look more traditional or more like film, and then you can kind of play with that a little bit in those settings, and you can get kind of a vintage looking photo that has those color temperatures, a little bit of grain, etc. And that might give you even a nicer starting point when you're kind of working in to an image like this and trying to replicate kind of that vintage style. Because you see, there's like certainly some of those abstractions of the real color that happens in camera, right, with the way that film is exposed and color processing. But there's also like quite a bit of artistic license that an illustrator of his caliber is using to alter the reference media and bring a particular vision, mood, tone, energy to the piece through color itself. So we might have this technical approach. It's like, hey, I want some hatching and some line work that's like kind of free and really vibrant. And then I want to put some washes down for some nice bright colors or whatever. And then on top of that, I want those masks, opaque color. But then you got to think about, in terms of your design, in terms of the mood, in terms of the impact of the piece, how do you want it to read? You know, what would it be best if it's sort of like a monochromatic piece with just like a warm white mask of highlights, you know, on top at the end, you know, as like a final piece? Would it be better if, you know, whatever? So you got to think about that color piece as well, and that might be something that I dig into a little more in depth in the next video. But for this one, just wanted to help out a Patreon supporter who was asking about this and finally get back to him and give him a decent demo of how I break down something like this. And again, I'm using the pencil first, watercolor second, and then the oil and acrylic paints for the final step. I like one of the things I like about the default or built-in oil paints is like the textured palette knife. It's awesome. I like using that almost more than the default oil painting brushes. I love the palette knife. And then for the brushes that I use all my own custom brushes for acrylic and for oil. I just think, you know, I like a little bit different feel than the default brushes for Rebelle, so I make all my own. And I think my Patreon members have access to all those. But yeah, use whatever works for you. I mean, it's not like that matters all that much. It's just, you know, if I'm painting every day, I want to use the stuff I like. So I like to make my own brushes quite a lot. Going back to this style, going back to this feel, going back to the Americana, I'm curious to know if any of you guys have like that icon, you know, that person that everybody in the family was like, oh, you know, Walter Payton, oh, you know, whoever, Dick Butkus, oh, Earl Campbell, oh, whatever. And how that felt to you as a kid, you know, and you start to be indoctrinated a little bit into whatever your family's culture is and who the heroes of that culture are, etc. I definitely was all about Walter Payton. And then later on when I was, you know, able to form my own opinions, I remember really being a big fan of Barry Sanders as well. I just loved the crazy audacious stuff he did, playing for a pretty terrible team back when he was with Detroit. But a lot of fun stuff. I think there's a lot left to do here and continue to explore. But for today's video, I didn't want it to be really long-winded. I wanted it to be more about just a quick demonstration of this technique and a little trip down, you know, nostalgia lane and think about, you know, it's especially poignant now that I'm a father. I'm thinking about like, gosh, what do I do? What kind of like be a man kind of pressure do I put on my son, you know? And it made me be sort of extra aware of that as I was painting this painting, thinking, oh man, I don't want to put that like, there were a lot of not so subtle conversations with my uncle about how, you know, about what a man does and what toughness looks like. And you know, those are formative conversations and they're worth looking at. And I know he had only the best intentions. It's just that, you know, sometimes the way we hear that stuff when we're little, it's interesting. It's worth thinking about. But there was a lot of good in it too. I just really love, even to this day, you know, if occasionally I'll like get into some YouTube searches of just watching Walter Payton run or watching Barry Sanders run, and you know, it's just a blast. So Hopefully you guys can find something you can grab onto here. Maybe you're a sports fan, maybe you're not. I know there are tons of things, it'd be this style would be just as effective at drawing Audrey Hepburn and Breakfast at Tiffany's, or, going way back and like drawing like Rita Hayworth or Cary Grant, or, just thinking about what subject, that might draw you in a little bit more. It doesn't have to be sport, obviously, but there's, it's something I don't usually do. I don't usually paint images that are about athletics. But it's worth thinking about. There's a lot of wonderful, amazing things that happen in sport, and I love the way that these historic illustrators have captured the essence of some of the courage and bravery, and made these moments timeless in the way that they've captured the light and the kind of spectacle of it. And I think there's a lot there, a lot to learn from that. And so I would love to see what you guys come up with in experimenting with this style, looking at Bernie's amazing technique, and just let me know how it goes for you, and if this was something that was helpful to you. Thank you guys so much. I'll keep doing demos all week. I have a lot more ideas, and thank you for all the support. You guys are amazing. Take care.